In the aftermath of the Second World War, history was rewritten not by victors, but by silence. Beneath the official communiques and public trials lay entire operations erased from record, battalions that vanished, files that burned, scientists who changed names and nations overnight. From the ruins of Berlin to the frozen coasts of Svalbard, fragments of hidden wars remained buried in archives marked Top Secret, Eyes Only. What little escaped the redactions tells of alliances born in shadows, technologies no one was meant to find, and missions condemned to secrecy before they began. These are the forgotten files, the wars after the war. Chapter 1. Operation Eclipse. The vanishing of Division 88. In the spring of 1945, as the Reich collapsed under the weight of Allied bombardment, something inexplicable occurred deep within the Thuringian forest. Division 88 of the Waffen-SS, an elite formation allegedly tasked with the defense of critical armament facilities, simply ceased to exist. The unit's last confirmed position was near Ohrdruf, a town surrounded by fortified hills and a network of tunnels carved into ancient rock. Allied intelligence later identified the site as part of Jonastal, one of the last major underground complexes constructed under the Reich's project. Schwalbe, the Swallow Project, intended for experimental weapons development. British and American reconnaissance flights documented the area throughout late March, but on April 5th, the 88th Division vanished from intercept logs. The final message received through Enigma-encoded traffic came from SS Obersturmbannführer Kurt Heinecker at 0412 hours. Eclipse initiated. All assets secured. No subsequent contact was ever established. When the US 89th Infantry Division reached Ohrdruf a week later, they found no trace of the German garrison, only sealed tunnels, newly poured concrete, and a faint chemical odor hanging in the air. Colonel Edward Hausmann, commander of the investigating task force, reported immediate evidence of scorched, materials inconsistent with combat destruction. His after-action notes were confiscated by SHAF, Command Under Emergency, classification orders, witness accounts from nearby. Villagers add further anomalies. Locals described hearing machinery running underground for days after the front had already passed. A farmer named Dieter Kleinfeld told American investigators that he saw trucks arriving at night, their headlights blacked out, escorted by SS units wearing insignia he did not recognize. These men, he claimed, spoke with clipped foreign accents, not Russian, not French, but something he could not identify. Within days, the roads were mined and blocked off. When US forces reopened them, all tracks had vanished under a layer of freshly spread gravel. What truly unsettled Allied command were the photographs recovered from a destroyed German courier vehicle found 5 kilometers east of Ohrdruf. The undeveloped film, processed in London in May 1945, revealed aerial shots of a massive excavation site, 3 descending shafts, surrounded by cranes and floodlights, accompanied by handwritten coordinates matching Jonastal. However, a faint symbol appeared in the corner of each print, a black sun enclosed within a double circle, an insignia later connected to the SS Technical Division and the Ahnenerbe's occult research arm. The negatives were marked Eclipse 1 through Eclipse 12 before disappearing into British War Office archives, never to resurface. By August, the US Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, began compiling its own classified report. Codenamed Project Eclipse Debrief, the findings remain heavily redacted, but several surviving pages mention captured German documents referencing energy amplification chambers and field inversion arrays. The terminology baffled Allied scientists. One section describes the testing of Rotations Apparat V, a device allegedly capable of generating gravitational distortion for experimental aircraft propulsion. Whether such a device ever existed is unknown. Yet what disturbs researchers even today is the consistency of independent testimonies gathered from different fronts. References to circular metallic structures, blue-white luminescence, and entire teams reassigned without explanation. In 1946, British intelligence officer Major Harold G. Litton attempted to reopen the investigation after intercepting Soviet field reports describing mass evacuations of German specialists near Gotha, within the same operational radius as the vanished Division 88. The Soviet file, recovered decades later, includes a statement from Red Army Colonel Alexei Voronin. We found hundreds of meters of tunnels, freshly sealed. The walls were lined with copper conduits, We heard faint electrical discharges, but no signs of the enemy. Soviet engineers attempted to breach one tunnel, but were ordered to withdraw under threat of radiation exposure, a claim the Kremlin later denied. Meanwhile, several officers connected to the eclipse inquiry met untimely ends. Colonel Haussmann died in a plane crash en route to Washington in 1947. Major Lytton vanished while stationed in Hamburg, and 3 OSS translators assigned to the project reportedly committed suicide within months of reviewing captured documents. By 1950, all reference to Division 88 had been struck from military archives. The only surviving copy of the initial SHAEF briefing, File 12-224E, was discovered in a private collection in 1983, its pages brittle and half-burned. The surviving text reads, "Evidence suggests deliberate self-containment of division assets to prevent capture. Objective unknown. Technology unrecovered, presumed destroyed. Yet traces of Operation Eclipse continued to resurface. In 1961, East German construction crews tunneling near Arnstadt unearthed reinforced bunkers containing empty crates bearing the Reichsadler and a stenciled code, V88E. The Stasi immediately sealed the site, and the workers were relocated under classified directives. Western intelligence analysts reviewing satellite imagery during the Cold War noted an unexplained magnetic anomaly in the same area, one that persisted even after surrounding installations were dismantled. The anomaly remains measurable to this day. Eyewitnesses who returned to the region in the 1970s spoke of sealed caverns where compasses spun uncontrollably and radio signals cut out completely. Local legends called it der verschluckte Berg, the swallowed mountain. For them, it was simply cursed ground, but for military historians, it represented an unresolved page of wartime secrecy that neither the Allies nor the Soviets ever truly controlled. In 1992, after German reunification, a cache of microfilm labeled Project Schwalbe Eclipse surfaced in a forgotten Stasi archive in Dresden. The microfilm, partially degraded, contained blueprints for circular underground installations, each featuring heavy electromagnetic shielding and cooling systems far beyond 1940s engineering standards. One annotation, handwritten in Russian, read, "Not found in any Soviet database. Considered myth." The documents were immediately seized by the Bundesnachrichtendienst, BND, and reclassified under national security statutes. Their current location is unknown. To this day, no one can explain what became of Division 88. No mass graves were ever found. No prisoners captured. No surviving letters home. Only silence, reinforced by the bureaucratic weight of classification. Theories range from underground weapons testing gone catastrophically wrong, to a deliberate disappearance orchestrated to conceal knowledge the Allies were never meant to obtain. What is known, however, is that the codename Eclipse continued to appear in US Department of Defense files well into the early 1960s, referenced in connection with joint NATO-West German containment protocols. One entry, dated 1963, describes an anomaly near the former Jonastal sector requiring magnetic field isolation equipment. Another mentions containment of residual emissions from sealed installations. Operation Eclipse remains one of the most perplexing unsolved enigmas of the war's final chapter. Every attempt to unearth the truth meets the same fate: obstruction, redaction, or unexplained disappearance of evidence. It exists now only in fragments, field reports, scattered interviews, and a lingering whisper among those who worked intelligence during the early Cold War. When historians requested access to the original Jonastal excavation logs in 2003, they were informed the files had been misplaced during archival digitization. A standard reply, perhaps, but one line in a recently declassified NATO memo suggests otherwise. It reads, "Site 88 remains sealed. Energy readings persist. Re-entry not authorized." Whatever occurred beneath the Thuringian forest in those final days of the Reich was more than an evacuation or a lost division. It was an erasure, planned, executed, and enforced across decades. Division 88 did not vanish into defeat. It was absorbed into history's blacked-out margins, where truth becomes classified and silence becomes survival. Chapter 2. The Cold Files, Ghost Station, Berlin. In the uneasy calm of post-war Europe, Berlin became the world's most volatile fault line. The city was split by ideology, occupation, and the ghosts of its own destruction. Beneath the ruins, a new conflict brewed. One fought not with tanks, but with transmissions, intercepts, and invisible currents of information. It was here, under the cracked concrete of U-Bahn tunnels, that Western intelligence established one of its strangest and most secret installations, Ghost Station. Officially, it did not exist. The CIA's Berlin operating base, working jointly with MI6 and the British Control Commission, designated the facility Operation Silverlight, though the men who served there called it something else. Ghost Station came from the name painted in chalk on a tunnel wall at Nordbahnhof, a stop long abandoned, sealed between the borders of East and West. The installation's mission was simple on paper: intercept Soviet military communications emanating from East German command posts. In practice, it became a listening post into paranoia itself. The station's construction began in 1951, when British engineers covertly reopened a disused maintenance shaft near Brunnenstrasse. The shaft led to a series of wartime bomb shelters, partially collapsed, but still structurally sound. By layering false walls and running disguised ventilation ducts through the upper tram lines, the team created a hidden complex complete with recording rooms, wiretapping relays, and a small barracks for 16 operatives. The entrance, disguised as an electrical substation, could be sealed in less than 30 seconds in the event of discovery. Among those stationed there was Sergeant Raymond Kessler, an American radio technician who had served with the Signal Corps in Italy. In a letter to his wife dated February 1956, one of the few pieces of correspondence ever recovered, he wrote, "We listen for voices in the static. Sometimes they come through clear as daylight, sometimes not at all. The strange thing is, they don't always sound Russian. They sound rehearsed." The intercepts were unlike any standard Soviet transmissions. Each began with a burst of coded static, followed by a faint voice repeating geographic coordinates. The coordinates, when plotted, corresponded to abandoned Luftwaffe airfields scattered across Eastern Europe. Biała Podlaska, Deblin, Kołobrzeg, sites already examined and cleared by Allied occupation forces years earlier. Yet new transmissions continued weekly, always from different frequencies, never traceable to a single source. The operators began to call the unknown sender Echo 1. In November 1957, Ghost Station went silent. A routine message from Kessler's team reported abnormal voltage fluctuations in the relay systems and the presence of condensation on the lower levels, despite freezing temperatures outside. That report was timestamped 22:48 hours on November 17th. The next morning, the base's external power feed failed. Attempts to contact the team through secure lines went unanswered. 2 days later, British security officers entered the access tunnel and found the hatch welded shut from the inside. When they finally breached it with cutting torches, they discovered the lower levels flooded waist-deep in water. Every electrical console had been destroyed. No personnel were recovered. For years, the event was quietly written off as an accident caused by faulty drainage systems. But not everyone accepted that explanation. In 1961, as the Berlin Wall was erected, a declassified report from MI6 officer Peter Howard suggested outside interference consistent with Soviet counterintelligence sabotage. Yet his notes contain a final line that diverges from bureaucratic tone. No signs of breach, locks secured, door sealed internally, impossible without cooperation from within. When the remaining Ghost Station recordings were finally analyzed at GCHQ, several tapes revealed an anomaly. Buried under the static of one transmission was a secondary voice speaking in English. It repeated the same phrase 3 times. They never left Berlin. Analysts initially dismissed it as crosstalk, but when they ran the audio through spectrum filters, the frequency band did not match any known Allied broadcast. The voice remained flat, calm, unmistakably human. Over the decades that followed, Echo 1 transmissions continued to appear intermittently across Europe, even as the Cold War evolved. French intelligence detected a similar signal in 1964 from the outskirts of Prague. The coordinates embedded in that transmission pointed directly to a Soviet-restricted area, once the site of a Nazi research institute. The CIA codenamed the pattern the Cold Files, believing it linked to surviving elements of the SS Technical Division that had been absorbed into Soviet research programs after the war. But official acknowledgement never came. When congressional oversight committees requested details in 1972, the CIA responded that no such files existed. Years later, Fragments of Ghost Station's original architecture were rediscovered during U-Bahn renovations in 1989, just months before the wall fell. Construction workers uncovered a sealed metal door at the end of a forgotten tunnel. Behind it lay a chamber lined with rusted recording equipment, bearing faded US Army Signal Corps markings. Inside, they found 12 magnetic reels, all labeled with the same date, November 17, 1957, the night the station went dark. Each reel was blank except one. That final tape contained 3 minutes of low hum, followed by faint breathing and a single word whispered twice. Eclipse, the discovery reignited. Speculation that Ghost Station's personnel had stumbled onto something they were never meant to intercept. Possibly, remnants of the same German communications network associated with the vanished Division 88. Some theorists proposed that both operations were linked by a shared post-war intelligence chain involving former Nazi engineers relocated under Operation Paperclip and its Soviet counterpart, Operation Osławiakiem. In both cases, the trail led back to projects concerned with high-energy electromagnetic research, fields still classified even decades later. In 1998, declassified CIA memoranda confirmed that multiple shadow listening posts existed beneath Berlin between 1950 and 1960, but only Ghost Station had gone offline without explanation. The files mention a radiation event and containment failure before the line abruptly terminates with redacted paragraphs. Freedom of Information Act requests have since been denied on grounds of national security, despite the end of the Cold War. Today, the sealed tunnels beneath Berlin's streets remain a labyrinth of half-forgotten passages, places where old wars echo in the hum of cables and dripping concrete. Locals who work night shifts near Brunnenstrasse claim that during power outages, they still hear faint bursts of static through transistor radios, followed by coordinates whispered in broken Russian. The voices always end the same way, with a pause and a single word: Berlin. Historians who study Cold War intelligence describe Ghost Station as a metaphor for an era of secrecy. Yet the physical evidence, the tapes, the sealed doors, the anomalies, suggests something less poetic. It suggests that the ghosts of the Second World War never truly died. They adapted, transmitting their signals through the corridors of a divided city. Every broadcast, every intercepted coordinate, seemed to trace a map not to new front lines, but to buried ones. The final note in the surviving Ghost Station dossier, dated 1965, was handwritten by an anonymous archivist in faded ink. It reads, "The voices persist, source unknown. Recommend indefinite monitoring." Below that, in pencil, another hand added a single question mark and one word: Eclipse. Chapter 3. Project Morning. Star. America's Hidden Convoy. In the months following Germany's surrender in May 1945, the Allied powers competed not merely for territory, but for the spoils of science. The ruins of the Reich concealed technologies, far beyond conventional warfare, rocketry, jet propulsion, chemical research and energy systems no Allied laboratory could yet replicate. Officially, the American mission was called Operation Paperclip, an effort to recruit German scientists before the Soviets could. Unofficially, another operation ran beneath it, an effort to move physical assets the world would never see again. Its name was Project Morning Star. Records from the US Army Transportation Corps describe an unremarkable event: a classified convoy departing Bremerhaven on February 8, 1946, consisting of 3 cargo ships, 2 naval escorts, and multiple sealed containers marked Recovered Axis Materials. Their documented destination was Norfolk, Virginia, yet the cargo never arrived. The ships vanished somewhere between Iceland and Newfoundland. At least that was the official account. The true story, fragmented, redacted, and hidden in the National Archives under multiple project names, suggests something far more deliberate. Eyewitness statements from dock workers in Bremerhaven describe cargo unlike any standard material shipment. Crates 3 meters high, encased in steel, bore the Reichsadler and serial numbers beginning with the prefix VRIL, a designation not recognized by Allied intelligence at the time. Each was transported under armed guard by men in unmarked uniforms who refused to identify their command authority. A typed memorandum from Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Keegan, dated February 4, 1946, notes, "Convoy assembled under direct War Department oversight. Scientific cargo to be escorted with utmost discretion. No documentation beyond Manifest Copy A. Manifest A was never found. Surviving fragments from the convoy's communication logs reveal increasing anomalies as the fleet moved westward. On February 13th, the USS Custer, one of the escorts, reported severe magnetic interference affecting both compass and radio systems. A signalman noted static bursts unlike atmospheric interference and ball lightning phenomena across the bow. The entry ends mid-sentence, followed by blank pages. The next available communication came from the convoy's lead ship, the SS Hartwell, reporting at DO 200 hours. Visual contact lost with Custer. Sky illumination northwest quadrant. Attempting course correction. Then silence. In April 1946, the US Navy convened a board of inquiry, chaired by Rear Admiral Jonas W. Haynes. His report, filed under Restricted Eyes Only, concluded that the loss of the Morning Star convoy is attributable to sudden environmental anomaly, likely geomagnetic in nature. Yet appended to the report is a handwritten addendum marked "Not for circulation," reading simply, "Energy readings inconsistent with natural cause. Recommend continued containment of related research." The recommendation was initialed HGH, believed to be Dr. C. Harold G. Honecker, a physicist attached to the Manhattan Annex's Special Research Division. That division, the so-called Manhattan Annex, was established quietly in 1945 at Wright Field, Ohio. Its stated purpose was to continue atomic propulsion studies. Declassified documents show that, within a year, its mandate expanded to include non-fission-based energy applications recovered from foreign sources. Several personnel overlaps exist between the Annex and the paperclip recruitment team, particularly engineers who had worked under the Luftwaffe's Forschungsamt and the SS Technical Division. The same names later appear in a folder labeled Morning Star Post-Retrieval, dated 1948, which suggests that at least part of the cargo, or data derived from it, did reach US soil. What that cargo contained remains speculative. A recovered Navy requisition form lists components described as rotational capacitors and field modulation coils. These terms do not correspond to any standard wartime technology, but they reappear in separate documents connected to Operation Eclipse, the same codename associated with the vanished Division 88. Cross-referencing personnel rosters reveals that 2 engineers from the Eclipse investigation were reassigned to the Morning Star logistics team before the convoy departed Bremerhaven. One, a Major William Prentice, later testified before a closed Senate subcommittee in 1952 regarding classified energy research. The transcript of that session was destroyed in a fire at the National Records Center in 1973. For decades, the Morning Star story remained buried under layers of bureaucratic obfuscation. It wasn't until 1989, following a Freedom of Information Act appeal by investigative journalist Raymond Steiger, that fragments of the original convoy orders were released. The recovered pages mention a VRIL containment protocol and a directive to maintain cargo integrity at all costs. What Steiger found most chilling, however, was a note scrawled in the margin beside the ship manifest. Under no circumstances exposed to open air. Maintain electromagnetic shielding until final destination. That line was underlined twice. The secrecy surrounding Morning Star did not end with the convoy's disappearance. In 1957, a classified project under the US Air Force's Wright-Patterson Division began experiments involving rotational magnetic systems derived from foreign research recovered 1945 to 46. The internal memo authorizing the study referenced legacy Morning Star materials. Witnesses from that era recalled a hangar filled with sealed metal cylinders, humming faintly even when disconnected from any power source. All references to those tests ceased abruptly in 1959. Another peculiar thread emerged in 1968, when the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration began cataloging unexplained magnetic disturbances across the North Atlantic. The strongest of these coincided almost precisely with the last known coordinates of the Morning Star convoy. Classified Navy bathymetric surveys later revealed metallic signatures on the ocean floor, objects roughly cylindrical, consistent with industrial containers. But no retrieval efforts were officially authorized. Unofficially, sonar logs from the USS Paris Island, dated October 1969, record presence of reflective mass, non-ferrous, emitting localized magnetic flux. As the Cold War intensified, any mention of the project was buried under new layers of classification. By 1980, Project Morning Star no longer appeared in any Pentagon database, but references persisted in obscure technical bulletins concerning energy containment, atmospheric ionization, and so-called non-standard propulsion theory. Researchers speculated that Morning Star represented the early foundation for American experimentation into field-based energy systems, technologies that mirrored descriptions found in captured Nazi archives under the codename Die Glock, the bell. Whether the United States ever perfected such research is unknown, but the eerie overlap between Morning Star and the vanished Division 88 suggests a continuity of interest in something beyond conventional science. In 2001, declassification of Select Department of Energy files revealed a final cryptic entry dated August 4, 1946, 5 months after the convoy disappeared. The entry reads, "All Morning Star materials accounted for. Containment complete. Further inquiry unnecessary." No details on how the cargo was accounted for, nor where, have ever surfaced. If the convoy truly sank, how were the materials retrieved? No salvage mission is recorded, no wreckage identified. Yet the magnetic anomalies remain measurable along the convoy's last logged route, an enduring echo of something that defied both loss and discovery. Today, historians who attempt to reconstruct Project Morning Star face the same barrier that has haunted every researcher of wartime secrecy: silence enforced by design. The convoy, the personnel, even the manifest numbers, each erased through systematic redaction. Still, a few scattered documents survive, enough to trace a faint line through history's fog. They suggest that what vanished in 1946 was not merely a shipment of stolen technology, but a transition, the moment when wartime experimentation merged into Cold War secrecy, a bridge between captured ambition and the classified future. One final artifact, reportedly discovered in a sealed War Department vault in 1999, remains unexplained. A steel identification plate, corroded but legible, bears the stamp, Project Morning Star, Bremerhaven to Norfolk. Beneath it, an inscription faintly visible under oxidization. Eclipse continues. Chapter 4. The Iron Archive. Secrets beneath Khabarovsk. In August 1945, as the world celebrated Japan's surrender, a far quieter operation unfolded in the shadows of Manchuria. Soviet troops, advancing under Operation August Storm, overran a network of facilities belonging to the Imperial, Japanese Army's notorious unit, 731. What they found was not simply evidence of war crimes, it was a vault of knowledge unlike anything the Allies had seen. The Soviets called it the Iron Archive. Its contents would remain hidden for decades beneath the frostbitten soil near Khabarovsk. The first Soviet report on the discovery, compiled by Colonel Anatoly Vasilev of the 25th Army, described a subterranean complex consisting of 3 main levels, fully equipped with laboratories, furnaces, and storage vats filled with preserved biological material. The entrance had been destroyed with explosives, but the lower chambers remained intact. Inside, Red Army engineers recovered crates labeled in both Japanese and German, containing hundreds of glass ampules and steel cylinders. Some were etched with characters identifying them as Kyono, 32, Tsubaki strain. Others bore German designations like BZ Atomstoff and Prüfserie EFH. Among the artifacts were documents sealed in oilskin envelopes, stamped with the emblem of the Reichsahnenerbe and addressed to Obergruppenführer Wirtz. The dates, February to March 1945, placed them months after direct contact between Berlin and Tokyo was thought impossible. These files detailed ongoing exchanges of medical and technical data under an initiative called Project Regenbogen Ost, Rainbow East. The objective, according to later Soviet analyses, was the integration of Japanese field-tested bioweapons research with German advancements in aerosol dispersal systems and radiological countermeasures. By September 1945, Lavrenti Beria, head of the NKVD, had taken direct control of the site. Orders were issued to relocate all surviving Japanese scientists and materials to Soviet facilities within the Khabarovsk region. The transfer was classified under the codename Opitnie Materiali, experimental materials. Approximately 60 individuals were moved under guard to what would later be known as Compound 87, a sprawling research complex disguised as an agricultural institute on the outskirts of the city. The scientists, among them Shiro Ishii himself, were promised immunity in exchange for cooperation. The deal was never publicly acknowledged. Their names disappeared into Soviet citizenship under false identities. Between 1946 and 1949, the Iron Archive expanded. Soviet biochemists under Dr. Ivan Sokolov conducted tests replicating the Japanese experiments, now merging them with captured German chemical warfare data obtained from facilities in Poland and Czechoslovakia. Reports indicate that Sokolov's team achieved breakthroughs in vector stabilization, methods of prolonging pathogen viability in sub-zero temperatures. One document, recovered from the archives of Biopreparat after the Soviet collapse, refers cryptically to atmosfernaye orужия, atmospheric weapons. These were not simply tools of mass infection, but early explorations into environmental warfare, manipulating humidity and aerosol dispersion to create localized weather anomalies. Official Soviet records never mention them. In December 1949, the infamous Khabarovsk war crimes trials took place, publicly exposing only fragments of what had been discovered. Western observers dismissed them as propaganda, unaware that beneath the courtroom lay an entire archive of suppressed truth. Testimonies were carefully curated to portray Japan's crimes while concealing Soviet appropriation of the data. The original documents, sealed in lead-lined cases, were transferred to Moscow's Lubyanka headquarters, catalogued under Section P7324, Confidential, Scientific Assets. The files would not resurface until the 1990s. Rumors persisted throughout the Cold War that the Iron Archive was not confined to biological warfare. American intelligence analysts suspected that the Soviets had inherited research into radiation adaptation, an experimental field explored by both Axis and Japanese scientists during the war's final phase. Captured reports from the Ahnenerbe's Department E. Ivor mention experiments in cellular mutation under variable magnetic conditions, purportedly to develop resistance to nuclear environments. When correlated with Soviet records, these experiments aligned disturbingly with those later conducted at the Institute of Biophysics in Obninsk, suggesting continuity of personnel and objectives. By 1953, Beria ordered the deepest sections of the Iron Archive sealed. An internal NKVD memorandum from that year, unearthed in 1998, states, "All further experimentation moved to satellite facilities, primary vaults to remain inaccessible until authorized by the Presidium." The same document lists the remaining contents in chillingly clinical detail. 47 samples preserved in ammonium solution, 23 frozen tissue cultures, 12 sealed canisters labeled tear, and 1 sealed container marked only with a black circle. The fate of these items remains unknown. Western intelligence first learned of the Iron Archive's full scope in 1962 through a defector known by the codename Malachite. His debriefing by the CIA's Special Operations Division revealed that Soviet bioweapons programs were using reconstructed Japanese methods under modified environmental protocols. Malachite described a secure facility 15 kilometers outside Khabarovsk, where sub-zero testing chambers operated continuously, each linked to underground reservoirs of chemical coolant. The defector claimed that the research had advanced beyond weaponization to biological field modification, a term never clarified in his testimony. He died in a car accident 6 months later. Following the dissolution of the Soviet Union, a new generation of Russian scientists began revisiting the buried complexes in Khabarovsk. Excavations conducted between 1992 and 1995 uncovered rusted containers filled with unidentifiable organic residue, along with fragments of German equipment bearing the markings of Heeresversuchsanstalt, Peenemünde, Several pieces of medical apparatus carried serial numbers matching requisitions from Auschwitz's medical supply depot, linking the Iron Archive directly to Nazi Germany's industrial death apparatus. The Russian government quietly halted the excavation in 1996, citing radiological safety concerns. No further work has been permitted since. Today, the remnants of Compound 87 still stand, disguised behind barbed wire and weather-beaten signs warning of contamination. Officially, it is a disused refrigeration depot. Unofficially, satellite imagery shows signs of recent maintenance, cleared snowpaths, heat signatures near vent stacks, and armed patrols at irregular intervals. Researchers who attempt to access the site are routinely denied by local authorities, who claim that the ground is unstable due to permafrost erosion. Yet, internal BND reports from 2007 mention that Russia's Ministry of Defense continues to classify the Khabarovsk region as a strategic biotechnical reserve zone. Among the declassified Soviet files that have surfaced, one stands out for its brevity and finality. A single-page memorandum, dated May 3, 1954, signed by Deputy Minister of Defense Boris Vanakov, reads, Opytnie materiali project concluded. Residual assets integrated under Directive Eclipse. No further elaboration appears, but the re-emergence of that same codename, the one tied to Division 88, Ghost Station, and Morning Star, suggests that the Iron Archive was never an isolated discovery. It was part of something larger, a network of post-war programs dedicated to consolidating the Reich's unfinished science under new flags. Whether those buried experiments remain active, dormant, or destroyed is a question no government has ever answered publicly. The Iron Archive endures as both a physical site and a metaphor, a frozen testament to the lengths great powers will go to inherit the forbidden knowledge of their enemies. Beneath the snowbound fields of Khabarovsk lies the legacy of men who believed they could master life itself, and the silence of those who chose to preserve their secrets rather than reveal them. The files may be sealed, but the ground itself remembers. Chapter 5. Operation Winter Forge, the Arctic Experiments. By 1952, the Arctic had become the last blank space on the post-war map, a place of silence, distance, and plausible deniability. Amid the rising tensions of the Cold War, NATO and the newly formed Norwegian defense establishment began investigating magnetic disturbances north of the Arctic Circle. Officially, these were weather reconnaissance missions. Unofficially, they were part of a classified program known as Operation Winter Forge, aimed at recovering and continuing research left behind by the German outpost Station Greif, which had operated from 1943 until its supposed abandonment in the final months of the war. The story begins with a fishing trawler, the Norald, which radioed the port of Tromsø on March 3, 1952, reporting unusual lights and aircraft activity near the Svalbard archipelago. The fisherman describes silent craft moving in formation, vanishing abruptly behind the mountain ridges of Nordøstlandet. Norwegian authorities, fearing Soviet reconnaissance incursions, dispatched a joint Anglo-Norwegian survey team. What they found beneath the ice defied explanation. Remnants of prefabricated German structures, electrical cables frozen in place, and rusted generators bearing Luftwaffe markings. Nearby, partially submerged in glacial runoff, stood an intact concrete entrance sealed with a metal door stamped Greif 2. The site was taken under NATO control within weeks. Internal documents from the Norwegian Defence Staff, dated May 1952, designate it Sector 12B, Arctic Containment Facility. Genre. American engineers arrived under orders from the Office of Naval Research to excavate and study the installation's contents. They discovered multiple underground chambers containing turbines, rotors, and extensive copper cabling. One chamber contained cylindrical housings marked Kältemaschine Type 5, roughly translating to cold engine Type 5. The device's purpose was never determined, though diagrams found on site indicated that it operated via magnetic field inversion and atmospheric ionization, terms far beyond the engineering vocabulary of 1940s Germany. A debriefing filed by Commander Harold R. Easton of the US Navy noted that instrumentation in lower volts responds to no known power input, yet remains magnetically active. His notes were stamped, "For eclipse liaison only." The reappearance of that codename, already connected to Missing Division 88, Ghost Station, and Project Morning Star, suggests Winter Forge was part of a continuing network of classified recovery operations, consolidating remnants of advanced Axis technology. The more they uncovered, the more the Arctic seemed less a frontier and more a repository. Eyewitnesses described the base as unnervingly intact, as if its occupants had left in haste. In a storage bay, technicians discovered sealed canisters containing unknown fluid, later identified as a cryogenic mixture with untraceable chemical composition. Several men exposed to it suffered severe frostburns despite minimal contact. Another chamber held reels of magnetic tape, though attempts to play them resulted only in bursts of feedback. Scientists noted that the interference resembled shortwave, transmission patterns similar to those once recorded at Ghost Station Berlin. In June 1952, just as the research began to yield measurable results, catastrophe struck. At 0317 hours on June 12th, all power readings spiked across the installation. Instruments malfunctioned simultaneously, and the electromagnetic sensors recorded a pulse lasting 8 seconds, strong enough to disable compasses and cause auroral displays visible as far south as Tromsø. Witness accounts described the ice around the facility fracturing violently, releasing clouds of vapor illuminated by a faint blue light. The power surge ended as abruptly as it began. When the smoke cleared, one of the primary turbines had collapsed inward, as though imploded. 3 men were killed instantly. 2 others later succumbed to radiation burns of unknown type. The surviving engineers were evacuated and sworn under the NATO Secrets Act. The official NATO communiqué classified the event as equipment malfunction during testing of geothermal power systems. But internal correspondence between British and American officers painted a different picture. In a cable dated July 4, 1952, Rear Admiral Benjamin G. Dwyer wrote, "The reaction observed at Station Greifswald indicates the presence of non-nuclear high-energy fields. Recommend sealing of chamber and discontinuation of research pending full analysis under Project Eclipse." By August, the entrance had been resealed with reinforced concrete, and all personnel involved were reassigned or placed on indefinite leave. Local accounts continued. By winter, hunters and meteorological crews stationed nearby reported auroral rings hovering above the site during certain magnetic storms, perfectly circular halos that rotated slowly, visible even through thick cloud cover. Geophysical readings taken secretly by the Norwegian Polar Institute in 1953 revealed consistent magnetic deviations centered precisely over the sealed base. Yet the data were suppressed, and subsequent survey missions were redirected hundreds of kilometers westward. In 1960, the entire region was reclassified as a NATO exclusion zone under the pretext of environmental hazard containment. When the US Geological Survey revisited the Svalbard region in 1978, satellite magnetometry still showed a localized distortion field. The anomaly measured 2 kilometers wide, faint but constant. Analysts reviewing the data noted that the signal pulsed rhythmically every 6 hours, a pattern too regular to be natural. The report was filed under Polar Energy Studies, Restricted, and its appendix included the curious note, "Residual activity may be consistent with legacy Kelter-machine experiments. Do not re-enter containment." Further revelations surfaced decades later. In 1991, after the Cold War's end, declassified British intelligence papers revealed that Operation Winter Forge had been transferred to civilian oversight under the NATO Science Committee. However, funding records indicate that millions of dollars continued flowing into Arctic infrastructure maintenance, even though the site had supposedly been abandoned. Satellite photographs taken in 1994 showed faint geometric outlines beneath the ice, 3 concentric rings, perfectly symmetrical, spaced evenly at 400-meter intervals. A memorandum from the US Defense Intelligence Agency, dated February 1995, remarked, "Ice melt reveals subsurface structures of probable artificial origin. Shape and configuration consistent with prior eclipse documentation." By the 2000s, all reference to Winterforge had disappeared from NATO archives. Yet local Arctic researchers continued to report equipment malfunctions when operating within 50 kilometers of the site. Magnetic compasses drifted aimlessly, drone systems failed to maintain orientation, and in some cases, battery cells drained within minutes. Environmental scientists suggested geothermal interference, but the patterns remained suspiciously consistent with artificial energy pulses. One declassified 2008 report from the Norwegian Ministry of Defense, discovered by investigative journalists, references a containment anomaly detected during ice core drilling near Nordøstlandet. The classified addendum mentions subsurface resonance detected at frequency band 27.3 Hz, identical to readings logged in 1952 prior to containment failure. Though officials dismissed the event as coincidental, internal memos requested immediate suspension of drilling activities in the area. Once again, the word eclipse appeared in red ink in the margin, followed by a single question mark. Today, the site remains sealed, guarded, and absent from public maps. Satellite imagery from as recent as 2020 shows a perfectly circular depression in the ice where Station Greif once stood, unchanged in 70 years. The surrounding terrain exhibits subtle heat signatures, inconsistent with the polar environment. The Norwegian government maintains that the area houses a Cold War fuel depot, but no flight or shipping routes are permitted within a 100-mile radius. Whatever the Keltermaskine was, engine, weapon, or experiment, it appears that neither its purpose nor its origin was ever fully understood. Its blueprints, if they exist, remain buried within NATO's classified repositories. All that endures are the faint electromagnetic tremors that ripple through the ice each winter, the kind that distort instruments and unsettle even the most seasoned Arctic crews. Operation Winterforge stands as the last known chapter in the long shadow of wartime experimentation, where Nazi ambition, Cold War secrecy, and modern denial intersect. Beneath the ice, something still hums, a steady pulse of energy, older than the Cold War itself. And above it, amid the silent aurora, the circular glow continues to return every year on the same night of June 12th, as if marking the anniversary of whatever was unleashed and never truly stopped. The files remain incomplete. Every operation, Eclipse, Ghost Station, Morning Star, the Iron Archive, and Winterforge shares the same codename, the same invisible thread linking battlefields, laboratories, and frozen frontiers. What began as the closing act of the Second World War may have evolved into something far larger, a network that transcended nations, ideologies, and decades. Somewhere in the classified corridors of modern intelligence archives, fragments of these programs are still active, renamed, refiled, hidden under digital encryption. The men who built them are gone, but their work continues to echo through forgotten data streams, sealed vaults, and anonymous budget lines. If the name Eclipse resurfaces again, it will not be by accident. It will mean the circle has closed, and what the world buried under ice, ash, and secrecy is finally stirring once more.